In case any of you haven't met me yet, I'm Holly Conrad Smith. I am the customer success lead at Giraffe. And I have a background in architectural technology, focusing most of my career in residential multifamily. I love talking about urbanism and smart growth and zoning reform. You can find me on LinkedIn and follow both me and the Giraffe page on LinkedIn for lots of really cool updates about the product and also just some interesting thoughts on equitable development, especially. I'm really excited today to give you all an overview of Giraffe's features. This session is meant to be interactive, so like I mentioned before, just drop your questions in that meeting chat and I will definitely get you an answer. The demo should take about 30 minutes, and if you want, I'll also stay on for a little bit at the end so you can ask any questions then as well. So with that housekeeping out of the way, let's get started. Someone asked already if we'll be sending out the recording. What we do is actually post all of these recordings to our YouTube channel. So there is a webinars playlist on our YouTube channel, and you'll find this recording there in about a day. So definitely check those out. There's also a lot of previous webinars that have really, really great information in them. Well, let's get going. So the first question is, what even is Giraffe? So Giraffe is a design tool, but instead of your canvas just being a blank page, it's the entire globe. So as you design, Giraffe also works alongside you, calculating areas, ratios, helps you lay out car parking. You can analyze solar, manage data. And Giraffe supports so many use cases: public engagement, density studies, zoning analysis, carbon tracking, the list goes on. But today we're going to do a simple feasibility study for a residential mixed use project. But the Giraffe skills you learn today will be applicable to any type of development. The first thing I always like to do in these 101s is just go through the user interface so you understand where to click to find everything that you're looking for. So the first thing to note is our top bar. This top bar gives you access to a lot of quick things. So here in the top left is your menu. So menu takes you to typical menu things. There's some export options. There's the admin panel where your user profile is. And then there's some information about your projects. Right next to that is our project view switcher or project navigator. And there's 3 different ways that you can view your projects in Giraffe. One is the map view, where we are now. Another one is Kanban view. So if you're familiar with Kanban, using cards to organize your project management, you can also do that with your projects in Giraffe. And then the third way is just a simple list, which you can filter and sort. So if you have eventually hundreds of projects in your Giraffe workspace, it's really easy to find the project that you're looking for there. Next over is your workspace switcher. So most of you will probably just be in one workspace, but sometimes you're working with teams in other companies. So you might need to switch which workspace you're in. To do that, you would just click on the workspace name and change it to the one that you should be in. The next item over is your project list. So you can select any project here that is in your current workspace. And if you're, again, shared to projects outside of your workspace, you can click show all of my projects, and then every project you have access to across all of Giraffe will show up in this list. Directly next to that is our new project button. And when you click on new project, you will have some options here to create a new project from some templates. Your workspace might not have templates in it yet, especially if you're new to Giraffe. So you'll just see this blank option. And when you create a new project from blank, it's just bringing in all of the Giraffe defaults. If you have more squares next to your blank, they will have names like maybe it'll say Boston template, or it might say, your company name template. That is something that your workspace admin has put together that contains all of the information that you should be using in your organization, in your projects. So to start a project with that information, you would just click on that square and it'll bring everything onto your current workspace. So that's really efficient for managing your data. Moving on to the left-hand side here, we have our data palette. So the data palette has layers, properties, which we'll look at in just a second, and views. Looking at the layer tree here, of note, all of these items shown here are included by default in every Giraffe project. So you will have a drawing layer by default, and that you can tell it's a drawing layer because it has this pencil icon next to it. And that is where you are going to draw. So it's any sort of information or data that you are creating in the Giraffe platform will go on a drawing layer, as opposed to data layers, which are connecting to outside data sources. So for instance, you can look at your satellite view. There is a 3D buildings layer that is included that is connected to OpenStreetMap. So you get an idea of what the verticality of that area is like. And then also map labels, which are just all of these sort of road labels and neighborhood labels that you see. So that is by default included in every Giraffe project. You can add additional data, which we'll look at in a little bit in this project as well. Moving on to the right-hand side, this is your app browser. So all of your apps in Giraffe are, by default, you're given the Urban tab, which will make more sense in a second once we start drawing something. Analytics, which is where you create all of your custom calculations and metrics, and then solar, which allows you to do some solar analysis. You can add additional apps by just clicking this plus button, and there are some public apps available, as well as any additional apps that your workspace may have purchased from the marketplace. Down in the bottom right-hand corner is our help, our info hub. So if you ever need help while you're working on your project, you can just click get in touch, and that takes you to a live chat. You can also explore our knowledge base, take guided tours. There's a lot of really great resources there for beginners, so definitely check that out. And last, but definitely not least, is our drawing toolbar down here at the bottom. So when you draw, you have all kinds of options. You can draw buildings, landscape, streets and parking, annotations, and then there's this fun lightning bolt, which takes you to generative design items. We'll take a look at all of those in a little bit. So to dive right in here, I am going to just show you a little bit about drawing. And to do that, I'm literally just going to pick kind of a random space over here and just start drawing something on it so that you can see what that looks like. So remember that in Giraffe, your canvas is a map of the entire world. So when I draw something, it is automatically to scale and automatically geolocated. I have just drawn a rectangle, and all this really is right now is a rectangle. It's kind of a gray color. It has a length, width, and area, and it's located somewhere on the earth. But other than that, there's not any information contained in this rectangle. What I can do to tell Giraffe what to think about this rectangle is give it some attributes. And those attributes in Giraffe are called properties. So you'll see now, because I have this rectangle selected, my properties palette has opened up. And you can see that there's some default options about this rectangle that I can apply, like it is on the default drawing layer. I can apply a usage, which we'll look at in just a second. But what I want to do is add a property to this. So I'm going to click add new property. And maybe that property is the height. So you can see as soon as I added the height property there, which I accidentally deleted it, so let me add that again. Once I added that height property, my just rectangle has now become a volume, and it has additional information about it. I can go even further than that and maybe give it a color, and that color might be, red. Now Giraffe has more things to think about this rectangle, like how does it cast a shadow? What color is it? What is that telling me about that rectangle? So all of those properties are very, very important for telling Giraffe what your design decisions are about the shapes you're drawing on the map. But as you can imagine, adding manually individual properties to a shape can be very time consuming, and you would not want to do it over and over again. So our solution for that is our usages. And usages are just a collection of properties like I just showed you, but they're saved already in a database. So you can add data to a shape in one click. And then Giraffe knows everything that you want to think about that shape. So what I've done is I've just changed that rectangle into a residential building. And you can see as soon as I did that, all of my data in my urban tab has started to fill in. So the data in the urban tab is things like your gross floor area versus your net rentable. I have an FAR. I have building coverage versus open space. I have the height of the building. I have an estimated unit mix, and I even have how many parking spaces might be necessary for a building of this type. So all of this data is pulling from the considerations that are saved in that residential usage. So editing usages is in your usage tab here. It's the top app in your app browser. And when I open that up, now I can see all of those properties that were saved into the database and named residential. So I can see that my residential building is a building type. There's lots of different types of usages in Giraffe, but when I assign it building, it tells Giraffe to consider certain things about it, like its solar impact and its efficiency factor and things like that. I have where I can set my efficiencies. So if you remember in the urban tab, it showed you gross building area, gross floor area, and net rentable area. This is where you set those efficiencies to control that ratio. I have my floor to floor height. So if I wanted this building to be taller, I could say, maybe this is a really nice airy building and it has 11-foot floor to floor. And then down below that for residential, there is a special section of properties for controlling everything about your units. So here is how it is calculating how many units are in this building. You can input the average size. You can put in a price per month or a sale price. And here is where it's controlling for how many parking spaces are necessary for each of those units. So it's important to remember that Giraffe is not, using some magical AI to read your local zoning code. And in fact, we don't really even want to do that because your personal goals might be different from the letter of the law zoning code. So you might be going in for variances to provide fewer parking spots, or maybe it's a luxury development and you want to provide more parking spots than is required by code. So we leave that open to you as the developer to decide. So you can put in how many parking spaces you want to provide per unit here. And then you can also estimate how many residents will be living in each of those units. And that's really great for things like impact analysis, tax calculations, and things like that. Right below, I can edit the unit mix by just dragging these sliders. Super simple to set that up. And then, of course, you have things available like the color that I want this to be. So I could maybe change my residential to be pink. And you'll see as soon as I save the changes here that everything I updated in that usage gets applied on the map. And if I close this, you'll see now I have a different required parking and a different unit count because I updated those things in the usage. I want to pause here for a second and make sure that no one has any questions about properties and usages before we move on. So feel free to drop a question in the chat if you have it, or, just how did you create the square for the property? Yeah, I will show that in just a second. I moved really quick, but I will show you the drawing tools as we create a project. So great question.
Hey, Holly, can you hear me?
Yep.
I was just curious if there's any way to like show the unit mix breakdown, like the visualization of it on the building itself.
Yep, there is. I hang out after Giraffe 101 and I can show you that. That's almost like Giraffe 102. That's getting into our generative design tools, which I will introduce at the end of this webinar, but the apartment tool is very powerful and very cool. So I'm definitely happy to show that to you at the end.
Sounds good. Thanks.
Yep. What are some of the limitations in the design tools? I would say, as far as limitations, and I'll put this in air quotes, is Giraffe is intended for pretty early stage feasibility. So you're not going to get the kind of detail that you would get in a architectural drafting software. So, once you decide to actually design your project, you're going to take that into another software like Revit or Rhino or AutoCAD to really get down to the nitty-gritty and design. But what Giraffe is great for is massing out a project, making sure in general that your assumptions make sense and that they're going to work financially before you move forward. So it's a a sanity check in a way, in that way. But the tools are still very powerful for that sort of early stage massing. Awesome. Well, I am going to now start a new project. And I'm just going to start over, get blank here. Perfect. And I'm going to, before we get started, add in some of those data layers that I mentioned earlier. So what we want to consider, especially when we're developing in a place like Boston, there's a lot of water coverage here. So there might be some floodplains that we want to pay attention to. So that's the data layer that I'm going to bring in here. And to find that data layer, I'm just going to click the data layer button. And that brings up my layer library. Giraffe has literally thousands of data layers globally uploaded into our software that are all open information provided by local governments. Different areas of the world have more or less information. We're very lucky in the United States that most of this data is considered open and available, and it's free to use. I'm going to show you loading in data that's already existing in the Giraffe platform. But of note, if you have an API link or a URL to any outside data source, typically in Esri or WMS format, you can also create layers from that. The other formats that we support are GeoJSON, shapefile, DXF, image data. So if you wanted to upload, for instance, like a site plan that's in PDF format, you can upload that and sort of adjust it to fit on your site correctly. And then if you want to get really fancy, if you're creating some styles in Mapbox, you can also bring those in as layers as well. But what I'm going to do today is just search for flood and just see what my flood overlays might be here. So you can see here, we've got a couple of FEMA layers that are available. My personal preference is the second one, just because I like how the data is displayed, but you can explore those layers on your own and see which one you prefer. To add it to my project, I'm just going to click this plus mark and then close out of my data layers. And as this data set loads up, you're going to start to see where there is some flood coverage on this map. So obviously here around the coast, there's going to be a lot of flood overlay. So that's really important to note. You know, there's in the Boston Seaport, there's really great frontage and it's beautiful, but you also are going to need some hefty flood insurance. So it's just things to balance when you're looking for sites. Another piece of data that could be really helpful when we're looking for a site is parcels. So in many areas in the US, there are parcel outlines. And I'm just going to go back into my data layers, search for parcels, and I see this Massachusetts parcels map. So I'm going to add that one. And I'm going to bring it on top here. And I can see, you know, these parcels are going to start to load up here. More data will load as I zoom in or out. That's kind of controlled by the data source, how much loads when you're zoomed in or out here. Maybe I will go next to this nice little lake here and take a look there. I am actually going to restyle these parcels a little bit using Lens. So I can tell that I can apply my own custom styling to these parcels because it has this little square icon next to the name. And that means it's a vector data set, which can be styled in Lens. If you see this image icon here next to the name, it can't be styled in Lens. It means it takes in the styling that was provided by the data provider. So let me just go in here and I'm going to style this a little bit just because I want the appearance to be a little bit different. So I'm going to give the outline of black and maybe I want the color to be by zoning. So now I have a really quick view of what my zoning assignments are for each of these areas. So that's a really quick, easy way to see what you're looking at. Now, of note, the fields that are available in each data set are going to vary by what's provided from that data provider. So in some areas, the parcel map might have zoning included. In other areas, you might have to bring in both parcels and zoning overlays to really understand what that zoning coverage is. It just depends on how the municipality formats their data sets. So do a little digging, see what you need. And I'm also always willing to help you out if you just shoot me a message in that instant messenger. So great. So now that I have these parcels, which I'm going to make them a little bit more transparent so I can see what I'm doing, I think that I want to grab maybe this parcel here that looks like it's pretty empty, but it's along a nice road. There's a lake across the street. Could be a really nice place to put a development. So I am going to start my project by clicking Draw Boundary to save project. And I can tell that I'm in that boundary tool because now there's a little dot following my cursor. So that indicates that I am in that tool. And what I'm going to do is just right click right on that parcel outline and then click set. And that is going to set my project boundary to match exactly that parcel outline. And that's important for your FAR calculations, your coverage ratios, because it's dependent on the site area. So then I'll just click Save Project. And I'm just noticing that someone's asking, does the software have any link to zoning regulation aside from the map itself? And no, we do not. And oftentimes zoning regulation is actually not open data. You have to subscribe to it. So that's something that you would manage through whatever your municipality supplies. Since Giraffe is map-based, everything that's displayed is going to be on the map, but there is a lot of data contained inside those data sets, so it can be very useful. I am just going to give this project a name here. I'm going to name it Giraffe 101. And then you can notice that there are some additional fields here. These fields will be custom to your workspace and are controlled by your workspace administrator. So these are the properties that we have in the workspace that I'm demoing in, but you might have all kinds of different properties provided to you by your administrator. So that's definitely something to ask your admin about. I'm going to just click Save Project. And in the next screen, it gives me the opportunity to share this project. Now, oftentimes when you first start a project, you don't want to share it with anyone yet, so you can just click Go to Project. But if you do want to bring in folks to collaborate with you, you can just enter their email, give them the correct permission level. So view, they can just look at it, they can't edit anything. Edit is what it sounds like. They can add data, delete buildings, all kinds of things. And then admin is the top level permission, which allows you to share the project with others and also delete the project entirely. So just provision the permissions to that project that you want that person to have. If there are teams set up in your workspace, you can also share the project with a team, which is like a small group of people that are set up by your admin. Or you can share the project with your entire workspace by selecting it from the dropdown. Today, I'm not going to share this with anyone, so I'm just going to click Go to Project. And my map will reload, and then I will be inside this new project that I've created. And you'll notice that because I created this project with some layers already included on the Scratchpad map, those layers have been brought into this project with me. So I still have that information if I want to use it. I don't need the parcels anymore now that I've created this project. So I'm just going to turn those off by dragging the slider all the way to 0. But I do want to leave those flood zones on, maybe just a little bit more transparent. So I'll turn them down a bit. Great. So now I have this project outline and I can start designing. So I'm going to dive right in with some of the drawing tools. The first thing I want to draw is a building. So I am going to click on the building tool, which is the first one in the row all the way to the left. And when I click on that, I see a list of different options. These options are the usages that are set up in your template. So if you remember having usages earlier, how we edited that residential usage, this is where you can draw something using that usage in one click. I want to do kind of a mixed use development. So I'm going to start with retail on the first floor. So I'm just going to click retail. And again, you can tell you're in that tool because there's a little dot following your cursor. And I'm just going to click here to define the first point in my rectangle. If I want this to be an exact length, I can type that on my keyboard. So I just typed 160 for 160 and it snapped right to that. And again, pulling up, maybe I want this to be 50 feet deep. So as soon as I clicked on that second click to define my rectangle, my building generated and it automatically gave it 2 levels. That's what's included by default in the retail usage, but I want this one to just be 1 level. So I'm going to come over to my properties palette and just drop that down to 1. So I just have a first floor retail here. Now, what I want to do next is add some apartments on top of this. So again, I'm going to click Draw Building Features, add my residential apartments, and I want my apartments to snap right to the front of this retail block that I've drawn. So to do that, I'm going to hold down S on my keyboard, and you'll see when I do that, that I start getting these red outlines that are snapping to my corners.
Holly,
Yes.
would you be able to let Mitla back into the video? Her computer died and she's just in the waiting room.
Yep, got it. Thank you so much. Done. So I've just snapped to the front there, and I'm going to make this, about 75 feet deep, just to, whoops, because I clicked off my screen, it's not going to let me. So I'm just going to drag it out to about 75 and click. And now if I jump back to my 3D view, I have a building that has my residential stacked on top. I don't want it to be 10 levels, so I'm going to drop this down as well. Maybe 6 is more feasible. Now I can see also, because I drew this on top of this other shape, it stacked it by default. If I wanted to change the order that these were stacking in, I could select either one of these shapes by just clicking on it. And maybe if I wanted the retail on top, I could change that stack order to 2 so that it's stacked on top. Obviously, that's not what we want today, so I'll put it back to 1. And this one I'm going to set to 2, so it's always stacked on top. And now we have this nice, double loaded residential block. I'm noticing a couple of questions in the meeting chat, so I'm just going to go back to that real quick. Susanna asked if we can edit the project outline. Yes, you can. You would just go to the general drawing tools and click Edit Project Boundary, and that will allow you to edit that boundary line. And then we have a couple of questions about setbacks. So setbacks, there's a few ways to do it. One way is to right click again on, I got to turn on my parcels. So right click on that parcel layer, create another shape, and then you can either, because this is pretty straight at the front, I can just drag these an amount. So maybe this has a 25-foot setback at the front. So I can just drag that back and then I can see where the setback is. Or if you have the same setback all the way around, or mostly all the way around, I can add the offset property and maybe offset it, minus 15 all the way around. And then I get this shape that shows me where my buildable area is. So that can be really useful if you have pretty universal setbacks. What I like to do when I draw shapes like this that are meant for showing buildable area is I will actually add another drawing layer and name it something like buildable area. And I will place that item on that layer. And then I will lock that layer so I don't accidentally select it and move it around. So now I can't select that and it'll just stay locked in that location. And Karina is asking if we can just type in the measurements. Yes, you can. As I showed earlier, you can type in as you're drawing, 160 by 50, and it'll snap right to those measurements. Cool. All right. So now let's jump to the next part of this. And I'm looking here at my outputs, and it's suggesting that I need 75 parking spaces based on what I've set up in my unit mix. So let's add some parking. I'm going to go back into my top view again and just click on my parking features. And I'm going to add a multi-deck parking structure. I'm going to use those snaps again to kind of snap to the edges that I had set up. And maybe have this come out 50 feet. I'll stick out a little bit behind. And then I'm going to go to 3D and just make sure that this overlaps correctly. So I drew this on the wrong layer. So obviously I did not stack this correctly. So let me just adjust this so that it's snapped in the right place. There we go. Snapped. And it looks like my my parking structure is a little bit taller than my retail. So that's controlled by the floor to floor height of the retail. And what I can do is just adjust that floor to floor height manually on this one to match the other one. So I think it ends up being 16, almost 16, pretty close there. You can input those custom floor to floor heights for anything. So you can really design it to be, the correct size podium that you want to show. You can see here now it's suggesting I only have 33 out of the required 75 parking spaces. So I need to make that parking structure a little bit bigger. And maybe I want to leave some green space. So what I just did is clicked on the center node here that was the sort of light red color to add another one so that I can turn this into kind of an L shape. So I'm just going to drag this out maybe another 30 feet and see if we get closer. Still not that close. I'll just drag it until we get the enough parking spaces. There we go. So you can see here, once we have enough parking, it gives you a nice green dot. So it's like, yay, good job, you're good to go. And it gives you a readout of the number of parking spaces that you have designed here. Now, the number of parking spaces provided in this shape is controlled the same way as the number of parking spaces required is. It is a metric inside the car park usage, and it's just how many spaces per 1,000 square feet are going to be estimated for this car park. Now, if you want to show the actual parking spaces, you can take this to the next level. So over here, we have this button in the properties palette that says Open Flow Builder. It sounds very exciting. It has a lightning bolt on it, and that's because it is really cool. So if I click Open Flow Builder, I have now all of these options that I can assign to this shape. So I can do things like round its corners. I could turn it into a forest, like crazy stuff. But what we want to do today is just add those parking bays. So I'm going to click Add Parking Bays, and you can see now that my parking bay design is kind of being generated on this shape. I do want to go in here and edit the size of these parking bays because I know, since our software is developed in Australia, that the parking spaces by default are a little bit small for here. So I'm just going to adjust those to be more of a correct size for the US. And I don't think I want open corners. There's some good settings there. you can adjust this further by either push pulling the shape itself, or I can say, like, maybe you start generating from a different reference edge. Like maybe I want it to start generating from this side instead. And you can kind of massage it until it gives you, you know, the most optimal layout based on what you're seeing. So you can see, hopefully in the urban tab, as I adjust these, it's giving a different parking space layout depending on which starting edge I choose. So that was the most optimal layout, and I'm happy with that, so I'm just going to keep it. Someone has a question in the chat. Yep. So Daniel's asking if there's a way to move everything as a group. There is. So there, I want to show you something really cool in the urban tab. So here, currently, all of our areas are separated by usage. And you'll note if I click on retail here in the urban tab, it selects everything on the map that is retail. What we want to do is look at everything broken down by building. So if I go here and change, instead of these areas being sliced by usage, change it to be sliced by building, you'll note that everything has been included in this building. It gave it a crazy code just in the background. You can update that code by adding the building ID property. And then you can control that building ID to be anything you want. So it can match your numbering scheme. And now I can see that building A is selected here. With all of those items selected, oops, I unselected it. I also have the option to group them. So I'm just going to click group. It gives that group a name. I might call that group building A just so it matches my building ID. Whoops. Add new property, building ID, so that comes back. And now whenever I click on any of this, it's selecting everything together. And if I pop up into my 2D view, then I can use my rotate tools and maybe adjust, move, put that back inside the setbacks, etc., whatever you need to do. There's also, of course, some additional tools here. So landscape and roads can be really helpful. So maybe I just want to fill in this back area with some green space, give this development some nice, a nice park that's part of it. And I also want to design where my parking entrance is. So I'm just going to do that by adding a road here. I'm just going to draw that road quickly across. So now I can see that I'm assuming the road is going to come across here. And, you know, maybe I want it to have a little tree. And I can tell people what I'm thinking by adding some annotations. So maybe I want to add an annotation here that says, you know, this is park. And I can adjust those settings as I need. I just did a whole webinar on annotations last week. So definitely check that out on the YouTube if you want to see this in more detail. And I will add one more here to my add label to existing. And I'm gonna group this real quick. So I can just get to that label. And I want this label to tell me the usage of that element. So I'll just add that, save that marker. And then that reads out there. So yeah, definitely take a gander at that webinar about doing presentations that I did last week. The last thing I want to show as part of Giraffe 101 is how to create views of your project. So I'll just jump into views here. And what views do is they take a snapshot of everything that's saved on your map currently. So any geometry that's visible, any layers that are visible. So I'm just going to click Add New View. And I can give this view a title like Bird's Eye. And you can see here a snapshot of everything that's going to be saved into that view. So if I save that, it's going to add the view to my project. And then I just want to create another view that maybe doesn't have my buildable area. Maybe it doesn't have my parcels. Maybe it doesn't have my flood zones. And I want that view to be a top view that's kind of zoomed in on the project. So I'm just going to save that map state and then pop into views again and just call this one top view. Save that. And now you have this nice way in your project to kind of cycle through different views. So I'm going to click on that top one and it brings me back to that original camera angle and layer state. And then if I click on the second one, it brings me back to this top view. So that's great for presentations. You can do a really nice presentation right inside of Giraffe without even exporting anything. So that's a really great way to show off your project. And with that, that is everything for Giraffe 101. We do have a few minutes left, and I would be happy to stick around and field any questions. But if you are satisfied, feel free to jump off, and I hope you do catch some of our future webinars and check out the ones we have on our YouTube already as well.